Hey guys, welcome to my channel VinoV. Today we're going to talk about what connects the myth of Atlantis, Ancient Thera, otherwise known as Santorini, and of course, Assyrtiko wine. So, quite an unusual mix of things today, but I'm pretty excited to get going. Let's get started. So, my love for ancient Greece has been there my entire life. When I was a child, I can remember being told all of these incredible stories like the Minotaur, Medusa, Jason and the Argonauts. And of course, that was intermingled with stories of incredible acts of heroism. For example, King Leonidas of Sparta and his siege against the Persians, the Peloponnesian War, legendary philosophers such as Socrates and Plato. All of these things kind of mixed together to form a whole. And of course, I suppose when something is so far in the past, as a child at least, separating the fact from the fiction was kind of hard. It was so far removed from how I grew up, how I knew the world to be, that it all seemed a bit like a fantasy. So naturally, when I started getting into wine and finding out a bit more about how wine can transport you as well, Greek wines were top of the list for me to start exploring. You can taste a glass of wine and be taken to a different country. You can begin to explore the stories behind the wine and understand the people making it, the cultures that have informed it, even beginning to taste how the landscape creates the wine as well. But first, I hear you asking, how does any of this connect with the myth of Atlantis? Well, that's a good question, and for that we're going to have to go back in time quite a considerable way. Before the ancient Greeks, as we know them, were really even a thing, there were a bunch of other civilizations living in the area. In the Aegean Sea, there was the Minoans, of course, on Crete. There were early Greeks, there were Persians in the area. Of course, the ancient Egyptians weren't that far away. And also, on the little island of Santorini, which was known as Thera back then, there was another little group of people, and they created some incredible artwork. There was a bunch of frescoes in this little town called Akrotiri. It's a little town that we're only just starting to discover piece by piece now as modern archaeologists uncover this preserved place. And in this little town, there were these beautiful frescoes all over the different walls. We have seen frescoes of human activity, people on boats trading, two boys boxing with each other, a fisherman showing off his latest catch. There's even one, the Spring Fresco, that shows over 3 walls a tableau of the life of a lily. You see a lily in full bloom, and all of them are growing on these really beautifully depicted rocks of blue and red. Quite why they're blue and red, maybe it was just the dyes that they had to hand. And above these lilies in the sky, there's these 2 little swallows dancing around with each other. And they're beautifully drawn as well in these really delicate, almost calligraphy-like lines. It's stunning stuff. And of course, with artwork as ancient as this, we have to be super careful not to prescribe too much meaning to it. You know, this was over 3,000 years ago that this work was created, and any meaning it had for the people is lost to time. We don't know why they depicted these things, but we can talk a little bit about how it makes us feel, and that subjectivity of art is important. So, to share my feelings on the Spring Fresco, when I see it, I think of the cycles of life and death. It shows these cycles of nature and an appreciation for the cycles of nature. It's a cycle of life and death that actually affected the Terrans as well. And it's this that actually connects us with Atlantis in this video. As I mentioned, this town was preserved underneath volcanic ash and dust. As you can imagine, that implies there was an explosion. And it wasn't just any old explosion. It's rumoured that this could have been one of the biggest explosions of the last 5,000 years in terms of a volcano erupting. It would have been astonishingly devastating, not just for the island, but for the entire region. There would have been years and years of ash-induced winter, droughts, tsunamis, to name a few little things that could have happened from it. But most striking is if you actually look at Santorini from above, you can almost see the outline of an entire island that would have existed, except for the fact that there is now a gaping hole in the middle of it, where the ocean has filled it in. If you go there, you can see this for yourself. There's a big caldera filled with ocean water, and a little mound in the middle of it, where the volcano still bubbles away and has some minor activity. It's incredible to think how that would have been for these Terrans when it actually happened. I mean, this volcano literally blew a hole in the island, and a sizable one at that. So this cycle of life and death happened for the Terrans too. They came to the island, they lived, they created this beautiful culture and these beautiful artworks, and then they died, sadly. But we now, as modern people, get to see that the island didn't die entirely. In fact, it is renewed. Santorini, as it's known now, is a bustling place. If you go, it has these beautiful white and blue buildings that draw tourists from all over the world. It has a culinary culture of seafood and very good wine. It has life. The cycle has continued. And it's this cycle that I think connects ancient Atlantis, these artworks, and this wine that we're going to try here today. So let's actually introduce the wine. Assyrtiko is a wine grape from Santorini in Greece. It grows in these unusual little vine shapes. You know, perhaps you're used to seeing vineyards with vines all along these trellises that hold the vines up in a certain kind of flat pattern, so it makes picking them nice and easy. But in Santorini, they're grown in these little bushes that are very close to the ground, almost in little dugouts into the soil. And this is just to protect them from the breezes from the ocean, as well as the intense sun. And they're quite rugged looking little things. They're very cool to see. Of course, this means that Assyrtiko, as it is grown on at Santorini, is quite a high labour intensive grape to grow. You can't machine harvest it, you have to hand peck it. And you have a lot of natural elements to contend with in order to make a good wine. The wine in particular we're going to try today is this one. It's called the White Ash Assyrtiko. It's from a shop in the UK called Majestic, and it is a protected designated origin of Santorini wine, which means it's 100% from Santorini. It's not an Assyrtiko from one of the other islands or indeed the mainland. Reading the label here, it seems to have quite an interesting history. It's made by two different winemakers, both of whom have incredible mythical sounding names, both of which I don't know if I can pronounce properly, but I'll give it a go. There is Vangelis Karamolegos and Leonidas Nasiakos. Yeah, these names look really hard to say, but what I can also say about these names is they are cool. I mean, Leonidas, literally the great Spartan general. You can't write this stuff. So this is a collaboration between those two winemakers. Now, having a look at the label there, it seems like it's from quite a ancient vineyard. We're talking about vines here that are over 150 years old. So this is a proper old vine wine, which means I'm hoping it'll have quite concentrated flavour. It does give some tasting notes on the back of the label, but I'm going to ignore them for the moment. I think when you're tasting wines, it's good to keep an open mind and not be guided too much. You can build up your own repertoire over time of what you taste and what you smell, and that's going to be sometimes objective, sometimes subjective, but it's good to practice trying to think for yourself with these kind of things. So I'm ignoring the tasting notes. So I think it's about time we actually sit down and try it, right? If I take the bottle here, let's start unwrapping this bad boy. Well, always nice when you've got a little pull string to take the foil off. Makes life a lot easier, especially if you're not very good with a corkscrew. And we're gonna open this up. Real cork, always nice to see. I have nothing against screw caps or indeed plastic corks, to be honest, but there are a lot of people that will argue the fact for the cork and say that it shows a level of respect for the wine. Make of that what you will. Here we go. Smells good, smells very good. So, let's give this a little pour. Beautiful. So let's hold that up so you can see. Really, really lush colour on this. It's more golden than anything. Usually for dry white wines, especially young ones, which it's a 2020, you expect it to be kind of paler, more lemon in colour. This is definitely gold with a little bit of green around the rim, which is interesting. Smells incredibly, incredibly rich. This wine has a really beautiful bouquet on the nose. It's apple predominantly, with a little bit of a saline edge to it, perhaps a hint of lemon peel, and a little bit of blossomy kind of notes as well. Blossom, I'd hesitate to say exactly what kind of blossom. It's just got that slight floral note to it that I associate with things like Riesling. Yeah, this has the makings of a really beautiful wine. Let's give it a taste. Ooh, ooh. I'm going to put my glass down so I can talk about that. So first and foremost, the acidity is really bright. You get that lovely kind of mouth-watering sensation in the sides of your mouth there. It's got quite a rich mouthfeel to it. It's certainly not a thin white wine. And what I mean by thin is like, it's not watery. It's got quite a lot of body and almost like an oily quality that's really, really tasty. On the palate, I'm definitely getting a lot of that apple flavour, slightly aromatic. The salinity in the wine on the palate isn't there as much as I thought it would be, which is surprising given the kind of environment it grows in. Really, really nice stuff. So I think for this wine, I can certainly say I like it a lot. It loses a little bit of its originality, I think, on the palate. The aromas that I was getting from the glass kind of come in second place on the palate, and it's replaced more by a rich, oily, apple leaning in, perhaps subtly to peach kind of flavour, which sounds weird, apple to peach, but I'm kind of thinking more of like the soft pink apples that you can sometimes get, and how it has like a very subtle kind of sweetness that is almost peachy-like. It's obviously a dry wine. The acidity is lovely and bright and clean, and it's very refreshing. If you served this over a summer barbecue, cooked up some Greek food, you would be having a whale of a time. Yeah. So, to talk a little bit about why I linked these three subjects, wine is a process of life and death as well. In this instance, this wine would have been grown on these super old vines, 150 years plus old vines. The grapes would have started budding in February, March, growing in ripeness over the year, and then being picked in the late summer, perhaps August or September, sometime around then. Technically at that point, I suppose the grapes sort of end their life, but they get transmuted into something else. They get transmuted into this beautiful wine through fermentation, the action of yeast mixing with the fruit sugars and the flavours evolving and growing into something new, almost like a phoenix rising from the ashes. It's fair to say you can really taste the vibrancy of Santorini as it is now. I feel transported to these volcanic vineyards, to this beautiful island surrounded by the Aegean Ocean. I can see myself in the sun now, with delicate fruit trees around me, in a little pergola kind of vineyard tasting room. And it's this same feeling that I got from the Thera frescoes, the Spring Fresco in particular. This sense of place and time, of the beauty and the transience of life. And I'm reminded of the myth of Atlantis. It's a myth that tells us of the downfall of civilization, But of course we know it in hindsight, and that in itself shows us that there is a cycle there. From the devastation of an ancient civilization to the renewal and birth of new civilizations that then go on to create their own cultures and stories, their own food, and of course extremely delicious wines like this one. Make sure to join me next time. We're going to be going all the way across the world to Australia, and we're going to be looking at some Shiraz from the Victoria region. So stay tuned and see you soon.